I knew something was wrong when I noticed my husband asking too many questions about my offshore accounts. But the truth? It was more twisted than I ever imagined. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now, back to the video. What if your picture-perfect life, your career, marriage, and future was all part of someone else's master plan? That's the question Victoria never imagined she'd have to ask herself. Ryan wasn't just a supportive husband. He was charming in a way that made people gravitate toward him. Friends often joked about how lucky Victoria was, how rare it was to find someone so invested in her work, while emanating warmth and charisma in every room he entered. To Victoria, his career had always seemed like an odd coincidence, given her extensive financial portfolio. But he framed his curiosity with care. When he asked about her stock positions, accounts abroad, or investment ventures, he phrased his questions casually, almost absently, as if the financial world simply fascinated him. "I see so many cases where people don't plan for the worst," he'd say, his tone light. "It's refreshing to see someone like you who's always ahead of the game." But they weren't just passing conversations. Over time, it started to feel almost systematic. Victoria began noticing how he'd lingered during her meetings with the CFO, or how his interest in her offshore entities seemed to override casual curiosity. She chalked it up to professional instincts. After all, why wouldn't a divorce lawyer be fascinated with financial structures? And yet, there was something in the way his attention sharpened whenever the topic arose that struck her as odd. Still, she silenced those faint alarms. "He's just thorough," she told herself. "Besides, wouldn't I know if something was wrong?" By the time the cracks in her perception began to show, they were small enough to ignore, barely perceptible shifts in behavior that could be explained away. For instance, Ryan's insistence on managing their joint expenses always seemed logical. The real tipping point came one late evening in their shared home office. Victoria had gone in to check her emails, but what she found wasn't hers. Ryan had left his laptop on the desk, screen open to a PDF document. At first, her eyes skimmed over the text idly, but then a specific phrase made her freeze: division of assets. Her mind raced as she read through the words in front of her. It was an early draft of divorce papers, and not some hastily thrown together document. At first, she hoped it was a misunderstanding, or perhaps even a client draft mistakenly saved onto his computer. But as she matched the listed assets to her personal holdings and noticed the specifics of last year's stock acquisitions included, the truth became impossible to deny. What struck her most wasn't just the papers themselves, but the effort it would have taken to gather that level of detail. Ryan had spent months, maybe even years, architecting this plan right under her nose. But what Victoria uncovered next would shake her even more. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a meticulously crafted trap. For a moment, when she found the draft of the divorce papers, Victoria felt completely unmoored. It wasn't just the idea of divorce, it was the betrayal on a level she couldn't wrap her mind around. She had spent over a decade building her life alongside Ryan, trusting him with every part of herself, from her most private fears to the details of her company's success. But clarity washed over her as the initial wave of heartbreak passed. This wasn't just about her emotions now, this was about survival. Ryan had spent years methodically digging into her empire, and the reality of his plan was far more calculated than emotional. He thought she wouldn't see it coming. He thought wrong. The illusion of safety shattered again days later when Victoria's trusted CFO, Marcus, ran a routine cybersecurity check. On her laptop, they found spyware, sophisticated enough to track screenshots, keystrokes, and even her private communication channels. That explained how Ryan knew details that she had never shared with him directly, like minor shifts in her portfolio and her plans for expanding Secure Nova internationally. This was no coincidence. He had been spying on her, using her devices to stay one step ahead as he pieced together his legal strategy behind her back. Victoria knew she couldn't confront him right away. It would only drive him underground, making him more cautious and harder to predict. Instead, she confided everything to Marcus and began orchestrating a counterstrike. They started by acting as though nothing had changed. The spyware wasn't removed, but it also wasn't left completely unchecked. Instead, Victoria and her team used it to feed Ryan false information. Through some carefully planted emails and staged documents, they created a trail suggesting that Secure Nova had run into serious troubles, losses in key markets, faltering negotiations for potential acquisitions. On Ryan's end, it must have seemed like her empire was beginning to unravel, and with it, any potential payout from the divorce. While Ryan monitored the false leads, Victoria got to work on protecting her assets. Her first decisive move was accelerating Secure Nova's Singapore expansion. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. The company had been planning this venture for years, with Singapore chosen for its business-friendly environment and robust legal protections for intellectual property. But the timing now served another purpose. By transferring select corporate assets to this international entity ahead of schedule, she not only safeguarded them, but did so through pre-established, legitimate channels. This wasn't some out-of-nowhere maneuver. It was smart and defensible, something that would preserve her holdings if ever challenged in court. Her legal team, led by Patricia Winters, also played a big role in organizing her defense. Under Connecticut's equitable distribution laws, the key to keeping her fortune intact would be proving what had always belonged exclusively to her. Together, they painstakingly documented everything: the timeline of her investments, the founding of Secure Nova before the marriage, and every reinvestment made solely from her premarital wealth. These weren't just numbers on a ledger. They were critical pieces of evidence solidifying the separation between marital property and individual assets. Still, Victoria knew that digital forensics remained a cornerstone of the fight. That's where Eliza Montgomery, a respected cybersecurity expert, entered the picture. Eliza combed through Victoria's devices and confirmed the extent of Ryan's breaches, identifying just how much spyware had infiltrated her systems. Armed with this knowledge, not only could Victoria and her team outmaneuver Ryan, but they could also establish undeniable proof of his unethical actions. Perhaps the most satisfying part came when Ryan's plan, which had seemed airtight on the surface, began showing fractures. His legal team, confident they'd gathered enough to dismantle Victoria's defenses, soon found themselves frustrated. Key assets that Ryan believed were vulnerable, like her offshore accounts and proprietary tech, were suddenly inaccessible, neatly tied up with stringent legal protections. The moment Victoria heard through her attorneys that Ryan seemed visibly unsettled during a meeting with his legal team, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of satisfaction. All those months of work, the strategic asset protection, the digital decoys, the airtight documentation, were paying off. His plan, so carefully constructed, was beginning to fall apart at its seams. But this was only the first crack. Ryan's shock was far from the final chapter. Because Victoria wasn't finished yet, she had one final move that would completely expose Ryan's true motives. Victoria's story isn't just about safeguarding wealth, it's a testament to resilience and strategy when faced with betrayal. Her ability to outmaneuver a meticulously planned deception shows the importance of knowledge and preparation. As she later remarked, financial control is often the invisible leash in toxic relationships. Breaking that leash begins with knowledge. This insight is a reminder to trust your instincts and act on even the subtlest red flags. Financial literacy can provide the tools to protect yourself, not just in relationships, but in navigating life's risks. Victoria proved that strength and foresight can outsmart even the most calculated deceit.